Okay, hello bookworms. I'm Rachel, I'm the host of Bonafide Bookworm, and I'm here just to help you read through some books, or if you're practicing your language skills, maybe you'd like to read along with me. I will give a quick update just because I talked about this book last week, Trouble with the Cursed by Kim Harrison. I did finish that book. What I wanted to happen finally happened in this book, so that's good. Like I mentioned before, I don't know if I'm going to continue to read this series. It just doesn't sound like she's writing anymore. It's really weird. It's almost like a ghostwriter is writing. If you happen to be a fan of Kim Harrison and you've read all the way through and you feel like that it's worth continuing, please let me know in the comments. I am going to turn the comments on this time. Hopefully I don't get terrible trolls, but you know, probably will because it's the internet. So anyway, so today we're going to pick back up with Touching the Void, the true story of one man's miraculous survival by Joe Simpson. And here, of course, is the cover. Now, last week we only read the foreword, and I don't want to spoil it for me either, so I haven't looked ahead to see like how long this chapter is, but we will begin the chapter and see how long it goes. I'm also trying something where I have a little timer here to help me keep on track. I expected last week's episode to be a little bit longer. Unfortunately it wasn't, because I have no idea what I'm doing. But as we go along, maybe it will get longer. Maybe I'll have more time to read with you. But until then, we're just shooting for maybe 30 minutes of reading time together. I'm also thinking that since we are going to be reading books, that you all might enjoy if I do 2 episodes a week, or maybe you're happy with just 1. I don't know. We'll play around with that, see if it's worth doing 2 a week or just 1 a week. So anyway, and you know, I hope too that if you don't want to read along, maybe you just like to listen, and you're more than welcome to do that. I hope you enjoy that too. Maybe I put you to sleep at night. Maybe that's the case. So it looks like we've got roughly about 18 pages of the first chapter. So we'll see how much we can get through in this 30-minute window here. Beneath the mountain lakes. I was lying in my sleeping bag, staring at the light filtering through the red and green fabric of the dome tent. Simon was snoring loudly, occasionally twitching in his dream world. We could have been anywhere. There's a peculiar, this is a hard word for me to say, anonymity about being intense. Once the zip is closed and the outside world barred from sight, all sense of location disappears. Scotland, the French Alps, the Karakoram, it was always the same. The sounds of rustling, of fabric flapping in the wind, or of rainfall, the feel of hard lumps under the ground sheet, the smell of rancid socks and sweat. These are universals, as comforting as the warmth of the down sleeping bag. Outside in a lightning sky, the peaks would be catching the first of the morning sun, with perhaps even a condor cresting the thermals above the tent. That wasn't too fanciful either, since I had seen one circling the camp the previous afternoon. We were in the middle of my goodness, there are a lot of words I cannot pronounce in this book, but you know what, at least I'm trying, and that's the biggest thing. If you're learning to read, just try. We were in the middle of the Cordillera Huaylas in the Peruvian Andes, separated from the nearest village by 28 miles of rough walking and surrounded by the most spectacular ring of ice mountains I had ever seen. And the only indication of this from within our tent was the regular roaring of avalanches falling off Cerro Sarapo. I felt a homely affection for the warm security of the tent and reluctantly wormed out of my bag to face the prospect of lighting the stove. It had snowed a little during the night, and the grass crunched frostily under my feet as I padded over to the cooking rock. There was no sign of Richard stirring as I passed his tiny one-man tent, half collapsed and withered with hoarfrost. Squatting under the lee of the huge overhanging boulder that had become our kitchen, I relished this moment when I could be entirely alone. I fiddled with the petrol stove, which was mulishly objecting to both the temperature and the coercion. Oh wait, I'm sorry, I skipped a sentence. I fiddled with the petrol stove, which was mulishly objecting to both the temperature and the rusty petrol with which I had filled it. I resorted to brutal coercion when coaxing failed and sat it atop a propane gas stove going full blast. It burst into vigorous life, spluttering out 2-foot-high flames in petulant revolt against the dirty petrol. As the pan of water slowly heated, I looked around at the wide, dry, and rock-strewn riverbed, the erratic boulder under which I crouched, marking the site at a distance in all but the very worst weather. A huge, almost vertical wall of ice and snow soared upwards to the summit of Cerro Sarapo, directly in front of the camp, no more than 1.5 miles away. Rising from the sea of Moraine to my left, rising from the sea of Moraine to my left, 2 spectacular and extravagant castles of sugar icing, Yerpaja and Rasak, dominated the campsite. The majestic 21,000-foot Ciula Grande lay behind Cerro and was not visible. It had been climbed for the first time in 1936 by 2 bold Germans via the North Ridge. There have been few ascents since then, and the true prize, the daunting 4,500-foot west face, had so far defeated all attempts. I turned off the stove and gingerly slopped the water into 3 large mugs. The sun hadn't cleared the ridge of mountains opposite, and it was still chilly in the shadows. There's a brew ready if you're still alive in there, I announced cheerfully. I gave Richard's tent a good kicking to knock off the frost, and he crawled out looking cramped and cold. Without a word, he headed straight for the riverbed, clutching a roll of toilet paper. "Are you still bad?" I asked when he returned. "Well, I'm not the full ticket, but I reckon I'm over the worst. It was bloody freezing last night." I wondered if it was the altitude rather than the kidney bean stew that was getting to him. Our tents were pitched at 15,000 feet, and he was no mountaineer. Simon and I had found Richard resting in a sleazy hotel in Lima, halfway through his 6-month exploration of South America. Lima? Is it supposed to be Lima? It might be Lima. His wire-rimmed glasses, neat practical clothing, and bird-like mannerisms hid a dry humor and a wild repertoire of beach-combing reminiscences. He had lived off grubs and berries with pygmies while dugout canoeing through the rainforest of Zaire, and had watched a shoplifter being kicked to death in a Nairobi market. His traveling companion was shot dead by trigger-happy soldiers in Uganda for no more than a dubious exchange of cassette tapes. He traveled the world between bouts of hard work to raise funds. Usually he journeyed alone to see where chance encounters in alien countries would take him. There were distinct advantages, we thought, to having an entertaining watchman in camp to keep eye on the gear while Simon and I were out climbing. It was probably a gross injustice to the poor hill farmers in this remote spot, but in the back streets of Lima, we had become suspicious of everyone. Anyway, we had invited Richard to come up and join us for a few days if he wanted to see the Andes at close quarters. It had been 2 days' walk from where the bone-shaking bus deposited us after 80 heart-stopping miles up the mountain valleys. 46 people were crammed into a ramshackle vehicle designed to carry 22, and we were not fortified by the sight of so many wayside shrines to dead bus drivers and their passengers. The engine was held together with nylon string, and a flat tire was changed with a pickaxe. And I just want to point something out. They spelled tire T-Y-R-E. In American English, tire spelled T-I-R-E. By the end of the second day, Richard was feeling the effects of altitude. Dusk was gathering as we approached the head of the valley, and he urged Simon and me to go ahead with the donkeys and prepare the camp before dark. He would take his time to follow. The way was straightforward now. He couldn't go wrong, he had said. Slowly, he staggered up the treacherous moraines to the lake where he thought we were camped, and then remembered a second lake on the map. It had begun to rain and grew increasingly cold. A thin shirt and light cotton trousers were poor protection from a chill Andean night. Tired out, he had descended to the valley in search of shelter. On the way up, he had noticed some dilapidated stone and corrugated iron huts, which he assumed to be empty, but sufficiently sheltered for a night's rest. He was surprised to find them occupied by 2 teenage girls and a large brood of children. After protracted negotiation, he managed to get a place to sleep in the adjoining pigsty. They gave him some boiled potatoes and cheese to eat and threw in a bundle of moth-eaten sheepskins for warmth. It was a long, cold night, and the high-altitude lice enjoyed their best feed for a long time. Simon came over to the cooking rock and regaled us with a vivid dream. He was firmly convinced that these weird hallucinations were a direct result of the sleeping pills he was taking. I resolved to try some that very night. I swallowed the last of my coffee as Simon took control of the breakfast making and then started to write in my diary. 19th May, 1985. Base camp. Heavy frost last night. Clear skies this morning. I'm still trying to adjust to being here. It feels menacingly remote and exhilarating at the same time. So much better than the Alps. No hordes of climbers, no helicopters, no rescue. Just us in the mountains. Life seems far simpler and more real here. It's easy to let events and emotions flow past without stopping to look. I wondered how much of this I really believed and how it related to what we were doing in the Andes. Tomorrow we would start an, this is a different word, acclimatization climb up Rosario Norte. If fit enough at the end of 10 days, we would attempt the unclimbed west face of Saula Grande. Simon handed me a bowl of porridge and more coffee. Shall we go tomorrow then? Might as well. I can't see that it will take us very long if we go light. Could be back down by early afternoon. My only worry is the weather. I'm not sure what it means. It had been the same every day since our arrival. The mornings would dawn fine and clear, but by midday, banks of cumulus would move in from the east, followed by the inevitable rain. On the high slopes, this came as heavy snowfall, and the risk of avalanches and lines of retreat cut off would simply become a reality. When such clouds massed in the Alps, retreat was always instantly considered. These weather patterns were different somehow. You know, I don't reckon it's anything like as bad as it seems, Simon suggested thoughtfully. Look at yesterday. It clouded in and snowed, but the temperature didn't fall dramatically. There was no lightning or thunder, and there didn't appear to be any desperately high winds on the summits. I don't think these are storms at all. Simon could be right, but something was nagging at me, making me question him. Are you suggesting we should just climb on through a snowfall? If we do that, won't we run the risk of mistaking a serious storm for the normal pattern? Well, yes, that is a risk. We'll just have to see how it goes. We're certainly not going to learn anything by sitting down here all the time. Right, I was just being cautious about avalanches, that's all. Simon laughed. Yeah, well, you have good reason to be. Still, you survived the last one. I reckon it will be more like the Alps in winter. All powder snow and spindrift, and no big wet snow avalanches. We'll just have to see. I envied Simon his carefree, take it as it comes attitude. He had the force to take he had the force to take what was his for the taking, and the freedom of spirit to enjoy it without grumbling worries and doubts. He laughed more often than he grimaced, grinning at his own misfortune as readily as he did at other people's. Tall and powerfully built, he possessed most of life's advantages and few of the drawbacks. He was an easy friend, dependable, sincere, ready to see life as a joke. He had a thatch of blonde hair, blue laughing eyes, and that touch of madness which makes just a few people so special. I was glad that we had chosen to come here as a two-man team. There were few other people I could have coped with for so long. Simon was everything that I was not, everything I would like to have been. What time do you reckon you'll be back? Richard asked dozily from his sleeping bag as Simon and I prepared to set off next morning. 3 o'clock at the latest. We're not intending to spend long over it, and certainly not if the weather breaks again. Okay, good luck. The early morning frost had hardened the loose ground, and the going was easier than we anticipated. It wasn't long before we fell into a steady, silent rhythm, zigzagging steadily up the screes. The tents became smaller each time I glanced back, and I began to enjoy the exercise, feeling fitter and stronger than I had. Feeling fitter and stronger than I had thought I would. We were making fast progress despite the altitude, and Simon was keeping to a steady pace that matched mine. I had worried unduly about whether there would be a marked difference between us. If a climber has to slow his natural pace to that of his companion, the unfit climber will soon find himself struggling to keep up. I can imagine the frustrations and tensions that would arise from such a situation. "How's it going?" I asked when we paused for a short rest. "I feel pretty good, but I'm glad we're not smoking on this trip." I silently agreed, despite all my earlier protests at Simon's suggestion that we should take no cigarettes to base camp. I could feel my lungs working hard in the thin, cold air. Heavy smoking had never affected my performance in the Alps, but I was forced to agree that it might be wise to stop during this expedition. The risks of high-altitude sickness and pulmonary edemas, about which we had heard so much, were all that helped me through a rough few days craving tobacco. It took a couple of hours to put the scree slopes behind us. Then we headed north towards a high col above an area of broken rock buttresses. The camp disappeared from view, and immediately I became aware of the silence and the solitude of our position. For the first time in my life, I knew what it meant to be isolated from people and society. It was wonderfully calming and tranquil to be here. I became aware of a feeling of complete freedom to do what I wanted, to do when I wanted to, and in whatever manner. Suddenly, the whole day had changed. All lethargy was swept away by an invigorating independence. We have responsibilities to no one but ourselves now, and there would be no one to intrude or come to our rescue. Simon was some distance ahead, quietly climbing, steadily gaining ground. Although he had stolen a march on my less methodical pace, I was no longer concerned about speed and fitness, since I knew now that we were pretty much evenly matched. I was not in a hurry, and he knew we would both reach the summit easily. If a fine viewing point presented itself, I was happy to stop for a moment to take in the view. Sorry, I expected that paragraph to end. The rocky gullies were loose and crumbling. As I emerged from behind a yellow outcrop, I was pleased to see Simon settled down on a col a couple of 100 feet away, preparing a hot drink. "The loose stuff wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be," I said a little breathlessly, "but I could do with that brew." "Seen Ciula Grande just over there, left as Serapo? God, it's fantastic." I was a little awed by the sight in front of me. "It's far bigger than those photographs suggested." Simon handed me a steaming mug as I sat on my rucksack and gazed at the whole range laid out before us. To my left, I could see the south face of Rassick, a sweeping ice slope with rock bands crossing it, giving it a sort of stroopy marble effect. To the right of Rassick's snowy summit, and connected to it by a dangerously corniced ridge, I could see the slightly lower summit of Sierra Norte. From there, the corniced ridge dipped down to a saddle before curving up in a huge sweep over two shoulders of rock to the final summit pyramid of Urapaha. It was by far the highest mountain to be seen and dominated our view as it reared glistening with ice and fresh snow high above the Silua Glacier. Its south face formed the classic triangular mountain shape, the west ridge, corniced and rocky, arced up from the col below Sierra Norte. The east ridge curling around and dropping towards another col. The face below this ridge was an astonishing series of parallel powder snow flutings etched like lace ribbons in the shadows cast by the sun. At the base of the ridge, I recognized the Santa Rosa Col, which we had seen in our photographs of Silua Grande. It formed the junction between Europa's southeast ridge and the start of Silua Grande's north ridge. This ridge looked relatively uncomplicated, where it began to climb up before narrowing and twisting and frighteningly thin edges of snowy cornice and flutings, which hung precariously over the edge of the huge west face. It peaked on the huge snow mushroom that formed the summit of Silua Grande. The west face was our ambition. At first it looked confusing, as if I hadn't seen it before. The scale and the fact that I was looking at it from a different angle from that shown in the photographs made it unrecognizable until gradually distinctive features fell into place. A huge bank of cumulus was beginning to spill up over north ridge of Silua Grande. As always, moving in from the east, where the huge rainforest of the Amazon basin, heated up in the day's sun, pushed out those regular banks of moisture-laden clouds. "I think you're right about the weather, Simon," I said. "That's not storm weather at all. I'll bet it's just a convection system coming off the jungle." "Yeah, just getting up our normal afternoon dousing." "How high do you think we are now?" I asked. "Must be about 18,000 feet. Perhaps a bit more, why?" "Well, it's a height record for both of us, and we seem hardly to have noticed. When you're sleeping at about the same height as Mount Blanc, it doesn't seem very significant, does it?" Simon said with a mischievous grin. By the time we had finished our drinks, the first wet snowflakes were beginning to fall. The summit of Rosario was still clear, though it wouldn't be for much longer. It was probably no more than 400 feet higher than our position on the col, and in clear weather could have been reached in little over an hour. Neither of us said anything about going straight down. It was an unspoken understanding between us that the summit would be left out at this time. Simon shouldered his pack and set off down towards the top of the scree slopes. He began to run and slide down the rocky gullies we had struggled up. Then we whooped and howled our way headlong down 1,500 feet of loose sliding screes, attempting to execute boots together ski turns and arrive back at camp, exhilarated and panting. Richard had started to prepare the evening meal and handed us the mugs of tea he had made when he spotted us high on the screes. We sat by the roaring petrol stoves to tell him in rambling, excited bursts what we had done and seen, until the rain came on up the valley in sudden waves and drove us into the shelter of the large dome tent. After it grew dark, at about 6:30, anyone approaching the tent would have seen only a warm candlelight glowing red and green through the tent fabric, and heard a quiet murmuring of conversation, punctuated now and then by gusts of ribald laughter, as Richard told a hilarious story about 8 members of a New Zealand rugby team lost in the jungles of Central Africa. We planned our future training climbs before playing cards long into the night. I think I'm going to stop there because we have A few more pages left, and I'm trying to be mindful of the time. I wanted to make sure that it fell into roughly 30 minutes. As we get going more, I hope to add more content. Maybe we read other types of books. It doesn't necessarily have to be like these daredevil crazy people that are climbing mountains. I'm glad there are people that like to do that, because that is something that I have no interest in. But yeah, let me know down in the comments below if you would like to have more videos posted more regularly so we could get through the books. And if you have any suggestion on books, let me know again in the comments. Thank you, bookworms. Hope you all have a great day. Bye.